All right, y'all, let's dive into this messy story. Imagine working on a flight, everything seemed routine, and then you walk to the back of the plane and you find a passenger with her pants down and completely unaware of what she's doing. Now, the crew, they were stunned, and the police were called to meet her when the plane landed. Let's break down this unbelievable situation together. Make sure y'all watch this to the end.
Okay, I thought I'd do a story time because there are a lot of questions, rightfully so. So yeah, I was working the flight. There were 3 of us flight attendants, and it was an early morning flight. We had already finished cart service, so we were all kind of in the front of the airplane, the forward galley, just kind of hanging out, shooting the shit. And I look to the back of the plane, and I see the bare feet up on the headrest in front of them. So I was like, so I'm gonna march back there and tell them to get their dogs off the damn seat. So I'm walking back there, and I'm ready to tell them, and I'm not joking, pants, underwear around her knees, feet up on the seat. Okay, not me walking by a school during recess telling this story. Pause. Okay, we're in the clear. I walk up and I see her in all her glory, and I mean, her eyes were rolling in the back of her head. She was not there. I go, ma'am, nothing. She's still going for it. I grab a blanket and I throw it over her. And I'm just standing in the back alley like, what the fuck do I do? So I call the pilots and tell them. And their first reaction is to think I'm joking. Because who's going to believe that? I go, pal? I've never been so serious about anything in my life. And it was at some point during the conversation with the pilots that she finished. And somebody asked me in the comments, how do you know she finished? Well, I have ears. She immediately fell asleep with the blanket over her. Luckily, it was a relatively empty flight, and she had, people move around to have extra room on the plane when it's not an empty flight. She had moved herself to the back row for some privacy, clearly. So there was no one really around her within like 3 or 4 rows. And if they did hear any commotion, they were doing their best to act like they didn't. Fair enough. So she stayed asleep for the rest of the flight, and it wasn't until final descent, where we're going around and making sure everybody's seatbelts are buckled, that all the other flight attendants are like, this is you're in charge of this woman now, unfortunately. So I tap her on the shoulder. I said, ma'am, I need you to buckle your seatbelt. By the way, the pilots had decided to call the authorities, and police were going to meet her on the plane when we landed. This is a 2-hour flight, okay? This is LAX to Seattle. Like, what are you doing, girl? So I'm waking her up to be like, hey, buckle your seatbelt, put your pants on. And she just looks so out of it, so confused. And she's sitting up, I could tell, I give her a minute. And she's pulling her pants up and stuff, and she looks at me, and I'm sitting in the jump seat, and I can see her from where I'm sitting. We're landing. I said, do you remember anything during this flight? She goes, no. And I said, well, I have to let you know to stay seated when we land because the police are coming. They're coming to get you, girl. And she was just shocked, and I told her what happened, and she was still kind of out of it, but I think the shock was really kind of waking her up. But yeah, as we were landing, she just kept trying to explain to me she took Ambien, she doesn't remember what happened, but that was it. And we landed, the police came and got her. People were asking oh, is she on the no-fly list? Does she get a registered sex offender, whatever? I'm a flight attendant. They don't tell me shit, All I know is the police escorted her off the plane, and we had to write a report, and that was that. That was a beantail. Honestly, I have so many crazy stories like this about too, but people check their brains with their bags, dude. They lose it on the plane, but they definitely don't check their beans. They keep those with them.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. Can you imagine being that flight attendant, walking back and seeing something so out of pocket? And the fact that the passenger had no idea what was going on just makes it even more unbelievable. I think the crew handled this as calmly as anyone could in such a messy situation. It's definitely one of those stories that will stick with them forever. But what do you think about how everything went down? Let's talk about it in the comments below.